Hi, so I'm here with Paul Wagner from the Stoccata School in Sydney. I'm just going to ask you a few questions. Hopefully you can answer them all. So first of all, when and how did you get into historical fencing, historical European martial arts?
Well, I turned up at Macquarie University in Sydney to start a PhD in biology. I joined the local historical reenactment club because it looked like fun. And at that point, one of the guys who'd been running it, who was Stephen Hand, had got sick of making sword fighting up and thought to himself, they must have written down how to do this stuff properly, found silver, and was just beginning to work through it. And I just basically arrived on the ground floor of that whole thing starting, and then the internet started to happen, and we found other people in the world, and it just took off from there.
Cool. Okay. So, so you worked with silver first of all, did you? And then what other sort of sources have you been through over the years?
Oh, well, quite early on, I became interested in Highland broadsword as sort of an alternative to silver, basically just through an interest in Scottish and Celtic things. So I got Matthewson first of all, and then collected the other manuals over the years. I also became interested in quarterstaff fairly early on, which is silver's kind of other weapon, which a lot of people just ignore. Mm-hmm. They just don't do the quarterstaff. And the other thing was 133 sword and buckler. We got a very early translation by Geoffrey Forgang, slightly different to the published one. And we got a photocopy of that, and we started to work through that fairly early as well.
Cool. So these days, what are your focuses in historical fencing?
Page's Highland broadsword is probably my favourite system. The English longsword has really come together, and I'm really quite happy with the way that that's worked out. So Liddell's English longsword. And apart from that, fiddling around with all the other stuff that we do. Swetnam we do as well, a little bit of Hope small sword.
As you mentioned Swetnam, actually, a question comes into my mind. So I've been over the years looking a little bit at Swetnam and a little bit of silver. How do you think Swetnam and silver compare? Do you think they go together, or do you think they're in opposition?
I don't think silver would have approved of Swetnam at all.
Okay.
Their principles are really quite similar.
Yeah.
And I think Swetnam makes a very good... He manages to apply good English principles to rapier fencing in a way that more or less overcomes a lot of silver's objections, I think.
Right.
Wait for the airport announcement.
So just for the listeners...
I'll wait for this and then...
Just for the listeners to explain, we're in a big gym at the moment, and there's a sports class starting next to us. So apologies for that.
Yeah, that's okay. But I like the simplicity of Swetnam. I haven't picked up a rapier for probably 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
Until this trip, and I've ended up having to do lots and lots and lots of rapier fencing everywhere I go.
Yeah.
And I can pick it up and do very, very well with Swetnam, even though I've sort of, it's been years since I've actually practiced it, and I like that about a system.
Yeah. What about Swetnam's backsword or broadsword, short sword, compared to silver's?
Very limited. I mean, his backsword is more or less, you're better off with a rapier, but if you've got one, you use it the same way.
Yeah.
I think it's a very limited system, and he only includes it because people have them.
Yeah, as I remember, Swetnam's sort of engaging guard with the backsword is a bit more like high second rather than...
No, it's more or less an outside guard.
It's an outside guard, is it?
Outside guard, and that's more or less it.
Right.
It's a fairly limited backsword system.
Yeah, okay.
And it really just builds on the rapier.
Okay, so today you've been talking about Thomas Page.
Yeah.
He was around in the mid-18th century, and he was a clockmaker, was he?
We know he sold clocks.
Right.
And he also sold Highland broadswords. That's really almost all we know of him, apart from what's in the book. It says where he's joined the Norwich Artillery Company. It's fairly clear that he is some sort of amateur swordsman. He's fairly familiar with both the London prize fighting, stage gladiatorial thing, and he claims at least he knows how Highlanders fight. And I think the rebellion happened. He saw a marketing opportunity. He said, I know how these guys fight. I will write a book and everyone will want to know because they'll be over the hill any minute.
Yeah.
And he starts off really methodically, and then he obviously starts to run out of time because the rebellion's ending and his market's disappearing. So he finishes it off quickly just to get it out there.
And so, in a nutshell, how would you describe Thomas Page's system? How's it? What's particular about it and what's different?
What's particular about it is that he describes the mechanical principles behind that style of broadsword very explicitly, I think it's intrinsic to the other sources. It's just not talked about very much. So it's nice to have somebody explaining it to us like we're dummies. And I think it's a really versatile system. It's this nice whole body action and is really adaptable to lots of weapons and lots of circumstances.
Do you think there's anything that's different in Page's broadswords to the other British sort of backsword styles of the time?
That's the question. I think the big thing about Page's thing is the left arm, the equilibrio. And as I say, once you've seen it, you see it in all the Napoleonic texts. You go and look at the pictures and you look at what they're doing with their arms, and they're moving it to different places as they change guards, exactly the way Page tends to do. Page is very exaggerated with it. The others can get it quite tight. And I think that the left hand is in some ways a training thing for the left shoulder. You don't have to do it as exaggeratedly as Page tells you to. But he's there explaining the principles, and so he makes it big so that we can see what's actually going on.
So this equilibrio is using the left arm to counterbalance the actions of the right arm?
Yes. And in particular, it's really about the left shoulder. It's about maintaining the alignment with the left shoulder as you move the right arm about. And the left hand is really a training implement to get the shoulder to do the right thing.
Right. Okay, well, Paul Wagner, thank you very much. It's been a fascinating class today, and I knew basically nothing about Page's equilibrio before, so it's been fascinating, and hopefully we'll see some more on it soon. So thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers.